recording is getting geared up, and we're recording. So for this week, the Torah portion is Ki Teitzei. It begins in our Eitz Chaim Chumash on page 1112. 1112. And it's Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 21, verse 10. That's where it starts. And then it goes on for a bunch of chapters. There you go. All right, Sarita's here. It goes on for, we're in chapter 21, and it goes on through into chapter 25. In the middle of chapter 26 is where we stop. So it's a bunch of chapters, and as I pointed out many times, and as so many other people point out, this Torah portion theoretically, in the way that the traditional accounting of the 613 commandments for the Torah, somebody's got something going on that's not making an echo. So no, it's still happening. Weird. You guys hear an echo too? No. Okay, good.
No, I heard it. I just muted myself when I heard it, and then take time to.
Well, but now I don't hear anything, so it's okay. Good.
For some reason, I can mute everybody, so I muted.
All right.
A couple of people. Yeah.
Good. You're the muter. So, and then when there's two people together who mute, they're commuters. Da-da-dum. Yeah, pretty bad, but what can you do? That's I know. It's what you got to give people a little extra leeway during this pandemic. So this Torah portion, according to the traditional way of counting out where the 613 commandments are in the Torah, this Torah portion has more commandments than any other Torah portion in the entire 5 books. The basic number is 74 commandments in Ki Teitzei. So again, if you multiply that by, let's say, 50, okay, there are more than 50 Torah portions, but if you say 50, then that's 3,500 and something, right? Something like that, right? And 20 more, or 3,000. What is it? 5 times 74 is always 3,700. 3,700 commandments instead of 613. If every Torah portion had this many commandments. Now, what this means, though, is that the portion is very choppy, right? It means that it doesn't have like one long narrative that goes on for a chapter or 2 or 3, or one discussion about one particular thing. It goes into many different kinds of issues. There are chains of mitzvot that are connected. Then there's other mitzvot that don't seem to be connected. So that's what we have here. So if you see page 1112, which is where we are, as I said, guess what the title is of in the commentary? Miscellaneous laws. Right, so they couldn't think of a topic to add. It's miscellaneous. It's a whole bunch of different things. So it starts out, and a number of these laws are pretty problematic. But yes, Beryl, you wanted to say something.
You did.
Yeah.
I like what mine says better. I've got a different book altogether, but mine says family laws.
The Hertz Chumash?
Yeah, I think so.
Joseph Hertz? Joseph Hertz?
I don't know what I've got. I know I have it's Hertz.
Right, that's a good Chumash. That's the old-time Chumash before the Eitz Chaim came about.
I know. Well, it works.
It works. Yes, so what do you like? What does he do?
They call it family laws.
Right, so that's actually, if you look in the Eitz Chaim, underneath the big title, Miscellaneous Laws, chapter 21 through chapter 25, then when we get to this, it says 3 family laws. So that's only the first few verses of chapter 21.
Well,
then
above it, I misspoke. Above it, it says laws of domestic life and human kindness.
All
Which
right,
I also like.
that's nice. I like that. That sounds nice. Okay. Anyway, so the beginning of the Torah portion has these family focused laws. If you want to call it that, it's a little bit of a softening of what's going on. The first commandment, which comes from, or the first topic, which comes from and gives the title to the Torah portion is Ki Teitzei milchama loibecha. When you hear, the translation is take the field. The literal translation is when you go out to war against your enemy. So it's about wartime behavior, and wartime behavior is historically throughout all the records and all places in the world. Wartime behavior is more often than not terrible behavior. It brings out the worst in all human beings. And what we have here in the first topic is that when you're out to war and you see a beautiful woman and you desire her, you take her, right? So this is capturing women in war, and the question of whether you actually first rape her or not. But the point is, you can't continually just hold on to her and rape her, but you have to provide her with some space to be safe in your home, to mourn her loss of her own people and her own family, and then the question is whether you actually marry her or not. So that's, as you know, we've discussed this other times, but that's the overall topic. Then the next one is about having two wives, and one of them you like and one of them you don't like, or it's all relative. One of them you like and one of them you like less. And what happens if the one who you don't like as much has the firstborn child? And you don't want to give the firstborn child a double portion to the kid from the woman that you don't like so much. You want to give the double portion to the kid that you like, which of course gives us echoes of the patriarchs and the matriarchs and all the mess that they got into. Then the next, anyway, the Torah says in that case, it says, no, firstborn is firstborn. It doesn't matter. Even if it's the woman that you don't like so much, if it's her son that's firstborn, he gets a double portion. You can't play favorites. Then the next thing is the rebellious child, right? That if a kid gets out of control, then kill him, right? So that's, of course, one of the more, deeply wise commandments in the Torah. That we can all agree on. So just kidding. Then the next thing is about human dignity, even for a criminal, and this bizarre situation of, on the one hand, executing and humiliating the criminal, and then at the next moment, treating the criminal with solicitude and making sure that they get a burial. So that I wrote about that in Torah Sparks. Anyway, and then it goes on and on and on. So there's so many different rules and regulations, so many different kinds of commandments. Famously, it ends with the commandment to remember what Amalek did to us. That's the very last paragraph, very last piece of text in our Torah portion. And that text, we don't only read it and on the Shabbat of Ki Teitzei, we also read it on Parashat Zachor, the Shabbat right before Purim, because Haman was also part of Amalek. Haman also tried to destroy us, so we're supposed to remember this all the time. So that's the last section that we have there. And then we've got a whole bunch of other zillions of commandments, 74 commandments. Take your pick. What would you like to discuss? Sarita.
There's a few different things, but one thing I thought I would ask you about, it's on 22 verse 5. A woman must not put on man's apparel, nor shall a man wear women's clothing, for whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord your God. So obviously we know your opinion about the verses that pertain to homosexuality, and you've reinterpreted them. What about this one?
Okay. So, thank you. So this one actually is easier because people have done work on this for, well over 1,000 years, and have thought about this because it's such a general kind of prohibition, and it can be applied in so many weird or unforeseen ways that every commentator, starting from the rabbis of old and the Midrash, and then all the biblical commentators, Rashi, and so on, everybody has been looking at this commandment. So what it says here is that, and it's again, okay. So the translation that we have here: a woman must not put on a man's apparel, nor shall a man wear women's clothing. And this is an abomination. Anybody who does these things. So we've got that really strong emotive word of disgust. And if we have time, we see that that word comes up in elsewhere in this Torah portion. So what's so disgusting? What's the problem? So some people read it very straightforwardly, that there are strict gender roles in Judaism, and God forbid that we should mix, just like we shouldn't mix wool and linen, we shouldn't mix meat and milk. We shouldn't mix men and women. Men should be men and women should be women. And let's not have any, mixed dancing kind of thing. So, I mean, and they see it as very, very straightforward. The problem is that how do you define what's a woman's article of clothing and what's a man's article of clothing? So we have, I think it's pretty conventional. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's pretty conventional that men's shirts button one way and women's shirts button another way. I don't know who invented that. Does anybody know where that comes from? No. Okay, so I don't know either. But but there's some kind of differentiation. People make these differentiations between women's fashion or women's clothes and men's clothes. Now, clearly there are physical differences. Men tend to be bigger, and and women smaller, or whatever. The shape of the body could be different in many cases. And then, of course, there's the standard idea in many places. I don't know anthropologically what the real situation is globally, but in our society, skirts and dresses are pretty much identified as female and as women's clothing. And we, unless you're a Scotsman, you're most of the time not wearing a skirt if you're a man, right? Am I inaccurate in that, Beryl?
You're absolutely accurate, but I Googled the other thing while you were talking.
Yeah. Okay,
and
good.
Apparently, women were dressed by their maid. So the right hand is on the other side, and most people are right-handed.
Look at
I guess men were supposed to dress themselves.
Look at that. So that difference. Look at how sensitive culture was to the working class. To make it easy for the maid, the woman valet, to help her mistress get dressed. That's cool.
So that's like the joke. That's like the cooking joke where this woman, she's married now and she's going to cook a pot roast, and so she's busy cutting off both ends. Right, both ends of the pot roast, and she finally asked her mother where that tradition came from, and her mother just said, "Well, it didn't fit in the pot." So right. So
you should know that Hasidic men button their clothes the way secular women do, as an effort to differentiate themselves from the goyim. So when they wear, let's say, a shirt or a jacket, it will button the other way. All right, definitely in certain Hasidic groups. Again, the generality, I don't know if it's everyone, but pretty much with the idea of trying to make this distinction. So the issue of trying to make distinctions, trying to keep things separate, trying to keep groups of people separate is pretty ancient. It's very, very ingrained. And then you end up having conventions. And then when conventions begin and certain things become usual, then people have trouble, forget about gender. People have trouble with anybody that breaks, the what's usual. Anybody that's unconventional raises eyebrows and most of the time gets resistance. And I mean, that's the outsider syndrome in any society. Person that doesn't quite march according to the drummers of everybody else. So what are you going to do? But these are all problems then with this very, very general thing that a man's clothing shouldn't be on a woman. A woman's clothing shouldn't be on a man. How do you define that? So, of course, in the Orthodox community, which tries to take this stuff seriously, we have questions, for instance, about pants. Can women wear pants? Because if dresses are automatically considered women's clothes, aren't. Look at that, Beryl, you did it. Here comes Geraldine. So this is a whole discussion, and of course, in many ultra-Orthodox communities, it's absolutely forbidden for women to wear pants. Absolutely forbidden. It's considered a violation of this biblical commandment. On the other hand, you've got ultra-Orthodox scholars. The most famous one was Ovadia Yosef, the rabbi who died a few years ago, who was considered the greatest Sephardi rabbi of his generation, a man of phenomenal knowledge, and he made the very commonsensical observation by saying, if we're really concerned here about preserving people's modesty and the whole problem, we don't want the genders to get in trouble with each other and all that kind of stuff. Are you kidding? Pants are much better for women than a skirt. So he said, of course you can wear pants. So he was pretty much of an outlier actually in this whole thing because of this, hard and fast, way of reading this as being women's clothes for women and men's clothes for men. We had a discussion about this in our own shul, Shomrei Emunah, remember? When I, early on when I was, when I first started, when I kept on pushing that all women should wear a talit. And there was resistance to that because people weren't used to it, or people had all kinds of other ideas. They don't like to be bossed around. And one argument that was brought up, which I thought was so disingenuous, was, wait a second, but a talit is a man's garment, because men have been wearing a talit for all these generations. So how could we violate, God forbid, this terrible sin of wearing a man's garment? As if none of the women go walk, borrow shirts, from their father and their brother and their husband when they want to wear a shirt or a pair of pants. They wear pants all the time. All of a sudden, this became like some supreme act of devotion to God, that not to put on a talit because maybe God will be angry. So it's a very it brings up weird things with people, and how you define this kind of stuff. So I think, now cutting to the chase, and this is based on not my own thinking also, but I didn't invent this, but if you really do think about this problem as being a problem of, in the end, sexual propriety, right? We want to create a society where where the relationships between the sexes are not chaotic, and where look at that. The bear is had a late night last night. The bear is nodding off. So if we think about some issue here, that could make sense to us. So this is what I think is a reasonable reading of this. And the commentators say the point, the prohibition is about creating an opportunity for sinning. So I read it as the prohibition against a woman masquerading as a man in order to be able to be in some men's company and then have a relationship with a man, and a prohibition against a man masquerading as a woman in order to be in a place where they can then fool somebody about who wants to sleep with somebody. Right? In both cases, it's about trying to trick somebody or manipulate or take advantage of somebody's desperation or gullibility, and present yourself as a sexual partner that you're not. That the person who's looking for a sexual partner thinks they're getting it from you, and they're not. To make this a little bit more or a little less outrageous, remember the musical Miss Saigon that was, whenever it was, 10 years ago or something like that, which was based on a true story about a person who and you know what, I never saw it, and I actually can't remember all the details. I think it was a man who dressed up as a woman, right? And as a result was seen as a kind of a high-priced kind of courtesan, and then became a woman of that was taken up by some man who thought that he was really a she.
I think you've got a different play. That wasn't Miss Saigon.
No,
it's something. There wasn't. Yeah, something else.
There was another story like that, right? And it was actually based on some kind of true story. So I don't know. Was it something else? It was something else. Anyway, that's what I think is the story here. What I think what the toeva is, and we can look at now at another place. What the toeva is, what the abomination is actually not the cross-dressing. It's the misleading. It's presenting yourself as someone who you are not, or somebody, some person, type of person that you are not, to get away with it, without being discovered, right?
So how does this affect, for instance, viewpoints about individuals who are transgender?
So I don't think that they're trying to fool anybody. I think that's their ultimate desire, is to the little bit that I can understand what's in their heads or whatever, is they look, there's a certain deformation that happens when society persecutes groups of people, and that happens it has happened to the gay community, and it happens even double in the trans community and so on. And you learn to live in secret. You learn to do certain things or develop certain codes, to survive. But I think that ultimately, most people that are trans in all of the different ways, whether it's trans, dressing, or transgendering in terms of how they identify themselves, they wouldn't love for nothing better than to be out in the open and accepted for who they are.
But I can see just as the verses about homosexuality have been used,
Correct.
Anti-gay. I can really see this verse being used as a way of judging people who are transgender.
Correct. That's why I'm saying the reading that I'm advocating does not do that, and it doesn't. But it doesn't even need to be retranslated, is what I'm saying. It just needs to be contextualized. And the key, like I say, is the toeva. Let's look at page 1135 Deuteronomy 25, verse 13. Verses 13, 14, 15, 16. So, Sarita, you're the honorary reader for today because you brought this up. It's all your fault.
You shall not have in your pouch alternate weights, larger and smaller. You shall not have in your house alternate measures, a larger and a smaller. You must have completely honest weights and completely honest measures if you are to endure long on the soil that the Lord your God is giving you. For everyone who does these things, everyone who deals dishonestly is abhorrent to the Lord your God.
There's the word again. Ki toavat Hashem Elokecha kol osei ele. Kol osei avel. So this is where you have an explicit identification of toeva, of abomination, with trying to fool people, with trying to get away with some kind of cheating that makes people think they're getting what they want to get, but they're not. So you're a store owner, and you've got your scale, and you put the vegetables on the scale, and it says you're getting your 1 pound of carrots, but you have tampered with the scale, and it's really a little bit less, right? And of course, this is the business with the weights, with the stones and so on, because that's the way they did it, right? You put the vegetables on one side, and here's a 1 pound stone on the other side. But you hollowed out the stone, or you manipulated the stone somehow, and it's not. So everybody thinks they're getting what they're supposed to get, but really you're cheating them blind. And this is disgusting, right? It's abhorrent to God to do this in the various ways that are mentioned here. So it's in light of that kind of use of the term that I read. The rabbis would call it a gzeira shava. You take a term that's found in one place, and then you use the meaning that's clear in that place to understand the meaning where the term appears someplace else. So the term is here, super, super clear. And then, as I said, the term is used with clothing, where the idea of how you draw the lines in clothing, if it's just about the clothing, it makes no sense whatsoever, because you'll never be able to figure it out, because fashions change and societies change, and all of these things are so intangible that it's impossible to figure out. What's clear, what is applicable, is the intent. If your intent is to get away with something, to fool somebody else, then that's what's prohibited. And using those disguises would be one way to pull the wool over people's eyes. And I think it's a certain there is definitely an association here with sexual behavior, and the idea of taking advantage of people's sexual needs and desires in an underhanded way is wrong. And if we take it that way, then it certainly can be expanded to so many other ways that people do this, which end up becoming tragic abuses of other people's trust and other people's, because that's what it is. It's an abuse of trust. The person thinks they're trusting that you look like you're a woman, and I want to sleep with a woman, and then it turns out that I'm sleeping, with somebody not according to my romantic fantasy or sexual fantasy or whatever. So taking advantage of people's desires is bad, right? Manipulating people is bad. That's the reading that I feel pretty comfortable with. And therefore, it really is not this kind of overarching, let's keep all the sexes in their place kind of message at all. All right. So we got a whole bunch of time left. If anybody else has another idea, speak now. No? All right. So let's look at another problematic one. I have to find it here. Where was it? I had it a second ago. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. It's in, yeah. Patience. Meryl, it's about time you showed up. Now we can start. Okay, here it is. 1122. Chapter 23, verse 3. So this is a section that's called in our commentary, forbidden relationships, and then subsection, restricted entry into the assembly. Okay, and it has all different kinds of back and forths about this. Certain nationalities are considered to be ineligible for joining the Jewish people. The notorious one is the Ammonite and Moabite is not allowed to join the Jewish people. And then, of course, we had the problem with Ruth. Ruth is from Moab. How did she end up joining the Jewish people, becoming the grandmother of King David, and of course the ultimate progenitor of the Messiah? So how did we do that? And that's a discussion for another time. We made an interpretation: a male Ammonite and Moabite cannot enter the assembly, but a female can. Right, and the reason that they're not allowed to enter is because they weren't nice to us, because they refused to sell us bread and water when we were on the road, trying to make it to the promised land. Just a side thing. This has nothing. This is not what I actually want to talk about, but just a side thing that Ammon and Moab also led us astray. That's the whole Bilam story, right? That they tried to curse us out, and then when they didn't succeed in doing that, they ended up actually going back to the other topic we were just talking about. They ended up seducing the Israelite men to worshiping idols by cohabiting with the women. So the women, that's not too good, is that? And yet that's not what brings up the rage of the Torah. The Torah doesn't even mention that here, as they are so disgusting, they're so awful. Look at what they did to you. Never have anything to do with them. No. Instead, what they said is you never have anything to do with them because they're not mentioned. Because they're just not nice people. They didn't. You were thirsty and hungry. You were willing to pay them for food, and they were so stingy and so mean to you. That's inexcusable. So we should just take note of what kind of messages there are. Very complicated messages sometimes in the way these things are balanced out. But what the Torah says here is never, 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 never associate with the kind of people who have no compassion. Something to think about in terms of our own society and how our political camps divide up. Where's the compassion? All right. Anyway, so talking about compassion, I want to bring up a really problematic verse and law, and that is verse 3. Okay, what do we got?
No one misbegotten shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of his descendants, even in the 10th generation, shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. Okay,
so misbegottens. That's the translation that they end up using here for the Hebrew word mamzer, right? And in the note they go mamzer. Its meaning is not certain. But give me a break. The meaning, in terms of our when we hear that word, I don't mean about now, but in the ancient times and into rabbinic times, and the way it was actually put into practice, a mamzer is a person born from an incestuous or adulterous union, right? So the prohibited sexual relations that we've had in other places, if they issue forth with a child, that child is stigmatized as a mamzer, right? Now the English word that is often used is a bastard, right? And then in Hebrew and Yiddish we have the same range, just like it is a technical word, and then we use it when we think somebody's not nice. Oh, that person's a real bastard. And we have, we're not talking about how they were born. We're just saying that they're really not nice. But when you think about it, of course, the misbegotten, the person, the baby that is born, is totally innocent, right? So forget about that they're a bad person, that you should use the word. They are the most unlucky, most, to be pitied little babies, in a range of situations. This is a terrible situation. They're born into the world. So misbegotten, is a kind of a fancy, softened up word, but it really means people who are born, and nebuch, what a shame. They were born in, as a result of this totally sinful act, and it's not their fault, right? The rabbis said, as a midrash, they said mamzer means mumzar, which means a strange blemish. Why is it strange? Because why should the person be blemished? Why should we consider this person to have anything wrong with them whatsoever? They did nothing wrong, zero. They just came into the world from the wrong parents, right? And if we look at I want to just make sure that we see this. Yeah. Let's go to 1131. And this is chapter 24, verse 16. Go ahead. Sarita, you got it.
Parents shall not be put to death for children, nor children be put to death for parents. A person shall be put to death only for his own crime.
So here it is. So here the Torah sees it so clearly. You don't punish somebody for somebody else's crime. And nevertheless, here we have this terrible sentence against where are we? I lost my page.
1122.
Thank you. Against this child, obviously now they've grown up, this person who did zero wrong, and they could be the most wonderful person in the entire world, and yet they're punished with this exclusion that they're not allowed to join the assembly. What does join the assembly mean? So in technical legal terms that the rabbis applied, it meant they can't get married to a regular Jewish person, right? And this applies to males and females. So if you are a child born from that kind of prohibited union, so when you grow up and you want to get married, you're not an eligible person to marry any Jewish partner. What are you supposed to do? You can marry another mamzer. You can find a partner if you're there's an app for that, right? Like instead of J date, it's M date. Mamzer date. You find another mamzer to marry. So and the Torah says and then you'll have children, right? You'll find another mamzer to marry. It'll be a wonderful romantic story. You'll find true love, and then you'll have children. And guess what? Now your children are stigmatized. And this is already from a illicit union. This is already from a marriage that's fine. I mean, it's the only thing you could possibly do. It's all legal. It's all permitted. Nevertheless, the stigma gets passed from one generation to another. So it's pretty awful. And the rabbis, acknowledge it. Here, the rabbis were never able to come up with an alternate reading. And yet they themselves, as opposed to, for instance, with the homosexual situation, where they just shared that value judgment, they believed that homosexuality was bad. But here, they acknowledged that it was bad, that it was wrong. I mean, they acknowledged that it seemed unjust. But they felt that their hands were tied. They felt that there was nothing they could do. They couldn't figure out what they could do. They did do a few things. There were a few kind of legal loopholes that were imagined that would break this cycle, right? Because it's an infinite cycle. It's perpetual. It's forever. So they thought of a couple of things, and we're not going to get into the details of that, but they could imagine one particular kind of situation where there's, it could work out that the children of the mamzer would no longer be stigmatized. The phrase that they used was "Yecholim mamzerim litaher." Yes, it is possible to purify mamzerim if you have this very out of the way arcane situation, but it doesn't solve the systemic problem. It doesn't solve the big problem. It would be like 1 in a million kind of situation. They also threw up their hands and they said something that they kind of acknowledged or accepted that if a mamzer is not known by anybody to be a mamzer, then who's going to enforce this law? Right? If the mamzer is born in New York, in some place, and then they move to Chicago or something like that, who knows whether they're a mamzer or not? Nobody's checking to see whether and again, let's say their mother, simple case, their mother was married to Joe Schmo. She had an affair with Schmo Joe. And that's how she had a child. How does anybody know that child is not from the legitimate father? So the rabbis then said, Kevan shenitmeu nitmeu. Once they, and it's not from the word tamei, it's from once they were assimilated and lost in the mix, they are lost in the mix. And this is where the conservative movement followed up and basically said that we will never inquire about a person's status, and we're actively, passively refraining from going into this kind of investigation. And not only that, we will never accept testimony about somebody's status that would impugn their legitimate Jewish status. So therefore, it became a dead letter. In the conservative movement, the idea was we will never, ever go that route. So we will not apply this law. And don't ask, don't tell becomes the mitzvah, right? That we're just not going to do it. So the law stays on the books, but we don't apply it at all. And it's based on what the rabbi said, which was a more of a passive thing. If it so happens that somebody is able to assimilate into the community, then we're not going to run them out of the community afterwards. Yes, Sarita wanted to say.
I think, I think about other places. So for instance, the laws that say that if someone does something, that you would have to stone them. And so then you you make it impossible because then there have to be like 10 witnesses,
That's
so
at the
it
beginning
would
of
just,
the Torah reading, the rebellious child.
right. So it would just strike me that, I mean, how you define mamzer and the circumstances under which it happens. And, again, whether it's made known, I mean, it would seem that there were openings for this sort of to then defined away. And I'm particularly wondering what happened in circumstances where an incestuous rape. So how was that treated? Or you can also think about non-consensual adultery, where there were cases where someone was forced. So how were those cases treated? I'm just sort of thinking about, it all hinges on how you define mamzer and what you require to prove that it in fact is so. And so it seems like it could have been just made like it would never ever be. No one would ever end up being called a mamzer.
So you're right, and historically that happens again and again. That kind of practical solution is adopted. What I was saying before was that they were never able to reread it out. That's what they couldn't do. So the law stays there, and then they have to struggle against it. When I made my proposal about changing kiddushin, about changing traditional Jewish marriage, I went through a long section where I pointed out historically how the adultery problem, which of course can then create mamzerut, the adultery problem was a problem for people. Because even though theoretically adultery is wrong, it's very bad, and it is very bad, it's wrong. Nevertheless, there are all kinds of situations that people have lived through where they want to stay together. And the law in traditional Jewish marriages, once an adulterous relationship happens, the marriage has to be broken up. It has been broken. It has been completely shattered, and the married couple cannot live together anymore. But it ended up not being livable. And certainly in today's day and age, it's not that anybody's celebrating adultery, but many people have suffered, let's say, an episode where one or the other of the partners has an affair, and then they decide they're going to forgive each other and they're going to live and they're going to stay together. So the law doesn't seem to allow that. So what I was showing in that section was how the rabbis bent over backwards to make that possible and to deny clear evidence that was right in front of them and say, no, that doesn't mean that, it doesn't prove anything, it doesn't prove anything. And with mamzerim, the same thing. With mamzerim, if there wasn't a clear-cut testimony of people that they saw that this was what happened, and they can prove that that's what the kid issued from. Even, I mean, we have cases in the literature where the husband goes away and doesn't come back for a couple of years. And meanwhile, the married woman gets pregnant. Well, you know what? According to the regular biological, facts of life, she slept with somebody, right? And guess what? It wasn't her husband. Her husband is across, is halfway across the world. And the rabbinic law is that all intercourses are ascribed to the husband until you can prove with witnesses that it wasn't. So what we end up saying is this fairy tale idea that somehow the husband flew back in the middle of the night and impregnated his wife, and then flew back again, with the angels taking a direct flight or something like that, because we want to close our eyes to this thing unless it's shoved right under our noses in a way that we cannot escape it. So this has been historically the way people have scrambled out of it. I want to give an intriguing extra piece of evidence to how uncomfortable the rabbis were with this, and of course they, there are all kinds of images that in the end of days the mamzerim will be, welcomed back into the Jewish people, and all of their suffering will be, rewarded. But they really felt totally that their hands were tied with regard to applying the law in this world. So there's an interesting set of discussions that revolve around a possible law. Depends on how you read the text in the collection of laws. It's called Masechet Sofrim. Masechet Sofrim is a post-Talmudic, so it's like from around the 9th century, 800 or something, collection of laws about writing a Sefer Torah, about being a Torah scribe, and so on. And in that collection of laws, it's possible, depending on what text you're reading, how you read the words, it's possible that that text says that a mamzer is not eligible to write a Torah scroll. So, and that law is accepted in the Shulchan Aruch. And then there's a whole discussion, wait, who said, is that really true? Is that really what it says? And so on. But the starting point is that a mamzer cannot write a Torah scroll. And then the subsequent discussion is, why not? The Torah simply tells us that they can't get married to somebody else, right? But there's no other mention anywhere of any other penalties or limitations on a mamzer. So why should we say that a mamzer can't write a Sefer Torah? What would be so? Where do you get this from? So there are all kinds of discussions to try to make sense of why that should be. We're not going to get into all of that, but one suggestion is very, to my mind, very interesting to chew on. What they said was that when you write a Sefer Torah, the Torah scribe has to wholeheartedly devote themselves to write the Sefer Torah. Hold on a second, I have to take this for a second. 1 second. Okay, so when a Torah is written, it has to be written by a scribe who is totally devoted to making this Torah scroll a sacred document. And every time they write God's name, they have to go to the mikveh and then dedicate themselves to writing God's name in holiness and in devotion. So the explanation for why a mamzer cannot write a Sefer Torah is that, let's read this one more time. Verse 3.
No one misbegotten shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of his descendants, even in the 10th generation, shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord.
Right. So we've got God's name in this verse twice. Right? No one misbegotten may be accepted into the congregation of the Lord, of the Eternal. And then it ends with God's name, right? The congregation of the Eternal. Right? So this explanation says, you know why a mamzer can't write a Sefer Torah? Because they could never write this verse with devotion to God about such a terrible thing that is sentenced to them. When they read this verse and have to copy it out into the Torah, they would be so miserable and so upset with the injustice of it that they would not be able to write this as a holy word of Torah. So therefore, if any words of the Torah are written without that intention, the Torah is pasul. It's not usable as a Torah. So, I mean, this is why I think this is very intriguing. So what it's doing in a kind of a backhanded kind of way is it's acknowledging, how could we expect any mamzer to accept this rule? Right? What we're saying is it's impossible to imagine that a mamzer would be able to thank God or accept that God is the true and merciful God, and that's the God that's doing this. Going back to the examples that we were bringing up before, Sarita brought up, how many people in the gay community have walked away from their religious heritage because they just simply cannot believe, if that's what God is, leave me alone, right? If that's what God is, I can't be part of this. So on the one hand, it's another limitation. On the one hand, it's like another, no, forget it, you're an outsider, right? But in a kind of paradoxical way, it's really also recognizing that how could we expect you to take this? No, we can look the other way, because it's no skin off my back, right? How many injustices in the world are there, and we don't pay any attention because they don't really touch us? So we can be happy and we can talk about how God is wonderful and so on. There's an interesting, subtle critique of our religious comfort, and it's a rule, right? We're not throwing it out. We're not rejecting the Torah, but it's understanding that we accept the Torah out of privilege. We are privileged enough not to be so discomfited or so oppressed by the Torah. Therefore, we can accept the Torah. But a mamzer, how could we expect the mamzer to accept this? So it's a very weird kind of back and forth here, right? It's another cruelty against the mamzer. Here's a mamzer that wants to be part of the community. I can't get married, but at least let me write a Torah. Let me be a participant in the community and in the whole Jewish thing. And then there's this kind of like, subtle acknowledgement. Who are you kidding? Are you kidding? This is, we can't believe that you would be sincere. Now, I say this with the paradox that, of course, there's a whole counter argument against this that says there's no point in this. That rule is a mistaken reading of the text. It's absolutely not true. A mamzer absolutely can write a Sefer Torah. If a mamzer wants to be part of the Jewish community in every possible way that they can, of course we should accept them into the Jewish community. But there's this little sneaky kind of acknowledgement that something smells here, that there's something that's not quite acceptable to our mind and heart. And we'll stop here. Okay.
Yashikov, thank you.
Right.